Welcome to what we think is an essential session for the Centre Court MBA Festival. I'm Matt Symonds. I'm here with my co-host, John Byrne, the founder and editor-in-chief of Poets and Quants. And we're going to be exploring a topic that has been making front page headlines around the world since the start of the year, and in particular, since the Trump administration announced a new $100,000 fee for the H-1B visa. Now, we often talk about innovation, AI rankings, admissions trends, MBA salaries, or the future of work. But today, we're looking at something more fundamental, the policies that determines who gets to study, where they can work, and how schools can compete globally. Now, over the last year, we've seen a remarkable convergence of policy shifts. I mentioned some of the immigration and visa reforms, including that $100,000 H-1B visa, funding priorities, pushing universities towards STEM, regulatory frameworks that now define not just quality, but purpose. These aren't isolated headlines. They're part of a bigger story about access, talent mobility, and the future of global leadership pipelines. For students, these policies shape opportunity. For employers, they determine who that can be hired and where innovation happens. And for business schools, they've become a new competitive frontier, one where agility and foresight and policy literacy are as important as brand and ranking. So, over the next 45 minutes, we've got a lot to cover. And who better to share a discussion like this than my co-host, John Byrne? Poets recently ran a provocative piece called The Decision That Could Redefine Business Education. From your perspective, John, is that what we're looking at?
Unfortunately, yes. Although I will tell you that I think the most disruption will be short term, but there will be, I think, longer lasting implications to what's going on. I mean, the bigger problem, instead of any singular policy decision, whether it's to put a $100,000 tax on an H-1B visa, or whether it was to pause the processing of student visas for a short period of time, which made getting an interview when that was lifted very difficult for many international students who couldn't get an interview in time to start their programs in the US. Beyond those things, there's the more overwhelming message from this administration that if you're an international student, frankly, you're not welcome. If you're an immigrant, you are not welcome. And that is, to me, much more problematic than any individual decision on a policy matter that has a more immediate effect. Because what's going to happen is the attitude that the US is the preeminent country for higher education, which is pretty much shared throughout the world. Yes, there are plenty of other great institutions, particularly in the United Kingdom and in Europe, that are absolutely world-class and superb. But there's also no question that in terms of business education in particular, the US has long been in the lead. And to think that students who would have gone here will be diverted to Australia, to Europe, to Canada, to Asia, and then will be ambassadors for those programs in the future, creates a long-term shift in the perception that the United States is the preeminent place to get a higher education. So that's a real problem, I think, that's going to be lingering well after the Trump administration is long and gone and forgotten or prosecuted, frankly. Um, but the immediate effects are pretty disastrous. I mean, even before the H-1B visa tax, you saw most schools lose a significant number of international students. Today, I happen to be on the campus of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and the Gies College of Business lost 200 international students this year already. And the revenue shortfall from that is $7 million to the school. UC Davis Graduate School of Management, they lost only 45 students, but the revenue shortfall from that was $2.5 to $3 million. So, given an uncertain economy, given I would call it an attack on higher education, in America, and now a loss of revenue that's quite significant for a single school. And you're looking at really, a big change in the business model of a school, right? There are three sources of revenue production for most U.S. schools. State funding, which has been greatly diminished at all levels. Philanthropic support, which has been strong in the business school community and I would say that that has been one of the bright parts of funding for business education in probably the last half century. And then tuition fees, which we know have gone up high and high and higher and have outpaced the rate of inflation for many, many, many decades.
Mm.
Those increases in tuition, frankly, they're over. Higher education is overpriced. And I think part of the attack on higher education and why we're not seeing a greater backlash is because people see these tuition fees and they're shocked by them.
That will
They've
be
been out of control. And
yeah,
I think it's shaped the public perception of higher education to some degree in a negative way.
yeah.
So if you lose significant tuition revenue, and you lose the diversity and the richness that an international student brings to a classroom, you're losing on business model and you're losing on learning experience, both,
Mm.
which is a shame. Now, I know that there are a lot of international applicants out there who'll be watching our webinar here, Matt. And to them, I would suggest taking a longer term view. Let's just make one thing incredibly clear. Every international student is not only welcomed, but embraced on U.S. college campuses. These are places that love the diversity of the students, of their classmates. These are places that depend on it. And the learning experience without you would be greatly compromised. And everyone here totally agrees with that. The faculty, the staff, the administrators, and the students who are in the classrooms. So make no mistake, despite whatever messaging or headlines you read in your local newspapers or on your streaming platforms, you are extremely welcome here, open-armed, and will be protected to the extent that immigration lawyers and the schools can do everything they can to support you and protect you. Another point needs to be made. If you're going into an MBA program, and you're going to apply, let's say this year, you won't matriculate until next year. You won't graduate for another 2 years. You do at currently have 3 years of optional practical training, OPT, to work in the U.S. Without difficulty because almost all the 2-year MBA degrees are STEM certified. And so you'll graduate into a different environment if you're in the application phase now or next year. And government policy will be changing. Now you could say, well, how do you know that another Republican administration isn't going to take over? I can tell you this administration is highly unpopular and is getting increasingly unpopular by the day. And I think you'll see the evidence of this very shortly in elections this November, in the governor races in New Jersey and Virginia, and you will definitely see it more pronounced in the midterm elections in next November in 2026. So, I think you can rest assured that the next administration is going to have a very different point of view, and they will come in with guns blazing because that's what Trump was able to do. He had 4 years to prepare for what is a revolution. It is a revolution here in government policy, and you can expect a new administration to have the same revolution in the opposite way. So I think that's really important to keep in mind that you're welcome, that you'll be embraced, and that by the time you actually graduate from an MBA program, that's 2 years, it'll be a different environment already. And then you also
Mm,
have 3 years of OPT for that new administration to figure out, okay, how should H-1B policies actually work better? Because there have
mm,
been flaws and problems with the H-1B and abuses of it by certain companies that have taken too many of the visas.
mm,
I think you probably end up with a much more open, much more fair process where internationals who have skills and a graduate degree and are able to contribute will even have easier access than they have had in the past. That's my
mm.
personal belief.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right now it doesn't look so good. And it's not only for students, incidentally, because the tax on H-1B visas greatly affects a U.S. business school's ability to attract the best faculty. A lot of the faculty at U.S. business schools has come from abroad. Many of them are of Indian origin, and they are spectacular, highly skilled, brilliant professors. And business schools, by and large, don't necessarily have an extra $100,000 available to get H-1B visas for their future faculty members.
Mm,
So this is going to be a problem in staffing as well as is a problem in the immediate revenue shortfall that occurs from these policies. And while
mm.
I'm giving you numbers for Gies and for UC Davis that are in the order of millions already, this is before the H-1B tax. This is even before the full extent of the attack on higher education in America became apparent. So you can only imagine in the aftermath of that what the impact will be next year and the year after.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, our focus for today is on business schools because, of course, as we look more broadly across higher education and the attack that you describe, this also extends to healthcare workers, essential healthcare workers, life science researchers, many that are working in tech and across different fields. Within the business schools, there's also that pipeline of PhD talent. And a little bit later on, we'll be talking about some of the other policies around DEI, diversity, the PhD project that has been under attack, Forte, the consortium, and those other issues. Perhaps before we move into more details on the H1B and the optics, one thing I think we both have felt in the last 3 days of Centre Court, and you've spoken to the warmth of that welcome, catching some of the sessions that we've had with the Goizeta School at Emory, with McDonough, Georgetown, Michigan Ross, that sense of a vibrant MBA classroom that is, these different voices, different cultures, different experiences and backgrounds that will make such fascinating discussions. And schools don't want to lose that. And so a little bit later on, I'd love to look at how schools can be creative to ensure that they can maintain those levels. But it is a global phenomenon. You talked about some of those shifts. We saw 8 years ago European schools that benefited when Trump first came into the White House, and there was a real spike in applications to top business schools in the UK and across Europe. Do you think that we're going to see something similar, given also that they themselves have their own mobility constraints and limitations on visas?
Absolutely. In fact, I just spoke with the dean here at Gies College of Business who made the point that business schools in the regions we mentioned, Europe, Asia, Australia, and Canada, are already experiencing major growth in applications from international applicants, far more growth than they can satisfy. I mean, the demand is way in excess of the supply and the capacity that they currently have. So there's no doubt that there's going to be greater interest in these great schools, let's face it, who actually can promise even a better international experience than the US schools can. The US business schools in general, 1/3 to 40% of an MBA class is international. And obviously in Europe, many of the programs, 90% of the students are international. So you get a much richer experience with no real dominant culture.
Yeah.
On the other hand, one of the advantages of having only a third or 40%, frankly, is many people come to the US because they feel it's the most let's say, unbridled system of capitalism in the world. I mean, when I was lived in Europe, it was referred to as jungle capitalism for the wild animals that roam the forest and practice it. But it is, a free market economy where lots of stuff and innovation happens. And people do want the US experience, even if they intend to go back to their native countries after getting both the educational experience and some work experience here.
Mm,
So there is value in the fact that there is a dominant culture. You want to learn from it, and yet you're still able to get that international flavor. But there's no question that schools outside the US are going to are already benefiting from this, and will benefit even more so as more of these policies take place, like the H-1B visa tax.
mm,
And the only question is, how much capacity do they have? They're going to get better students. Incidentally, they're going to get more students from the US. There's no doubt
mm,
about that, because I think an increasing number of US applicants or would-be students um, both desire a global experience and frankly want to take a hiatus from what is going on here, uh, sadly. But
mm.
that is definitely true.
Yeah. As we look at the reactions to the new executive order for the H-1B, a $100,000 annual fee. If we look at the 2024 figures, I think you had Amazon that had hired close to 3,500 through the H-1B program, Deloitte, Goldman, many of the big tech firms, of course. And what 70% of the 100,000 H-1B visas issued in 2024 were Indian applicants. So, what might it change in a system that's long been under discussion? Is it possible that now that we've put this significant price tag, we've increased it by over 500% in its cost, will that actually provide some level of guarantee to some of the bigger firms that are going to absorb that cost? And will we end up with a two-tier system of those top MBA programs that maybe have a safer pipeline to those recruiters and that others will get squeezed?
It's causing a number of effects, and one is what you just noted. Because, an Amazon or a Google or a Microsoft can afford to pay the $100,000. Most business schools cannot in hiring faculty, and
Mm,
most other firms either don't want to pay it out of principle, or already don't even want to do the paperwork and will not recruit international students. And that has largely been something of a problem for career management offices that are trying to help international students get jobs in the US, and that's been a problem for some time. This only complicates it because only a few companies can easily pay the 100 grand and would. So that's definitely an issue and a problem.
mm. Yeah. Where does that then take us in terms of, we talked about application trends, perhaps Europe among the beneficiaries, they'll see many more candidates in their pool this year. We already saw what a 19% drop in international students that showed up for their studies at the beginning of this new school year. Um, in terms of even a candidate sharing with a US business school the idea of staying to work in the US. Now, you talked about the OPT, which is already 12 months, and with a STEM designated MBA program that extends to 3 years. Do you think that international candidates should indicate in their application that they want to stay and work in the United States, or could that become a red flag?
No, I think they should be honest and transparent about their desire to stay. I don't think that hurts you at all. Um, I think what it does is make career management understand that, uh, as soon as you accept, even before you show up, they need to start working with you immediately. And I think it also means, from an applicant point of view, that you have to have a plan B and maybe a plan C for yourself, given the uncertainty in the market. Um, but again, all this can change in 3 years, and could be a very different environment entirely. But already, yeah, many of the U.S. schools are overweighting domestic applicants. There was concern that the yield rates on accepted international applicants would be significantly lower given the re-election of Trump, and then given the pause and processing student visas. So many of the schools overweighted on domestics to begin with because they have tremendous depth, a lot of bench strength in their applicant pools. This is not about taking people who are less qualified. There are plenty of qualified people. I mean, the rule of thumb is 80% of a school's applicant pool is fully qualified to attend and do well in the program and afterward. But obviously, Stanford only accepts 6%, and Harvard only accepts 12%, and Wharton accepts 18%. So there's a lot of people behind them who are as qualified, if not, in fact, by any measure, more qualified than the people who've been selected. That's part of the randomness of elite school application decisions.
Mm.
So, what I've heard is that many schools have overweighted domestics for fear that yield on internationals would be down this year. I expect that to even be more emphasized in this coming application season. So, what that means that if you're an international applicant, um, and you express a very strong desire to come here and make it clear to admissions that this is what you want to do and this is what you intend to do, and you're not going to change your mind. I think that's an important part of this. I think your odds of success go up. Uh,
Mm.
but
I was going to ask you, and given
you,
that the
you
two of
got to
us
convince. You got to
have
convince
based
people
our
like you're
career
going to come
path on,
here.
yeah, both of
This
us have
can't
based our
be.
career path on
Yeah,
opportunity out of challenges. Um,
yeah.
if indeed, when you, as recently as 12 months ago, Wharton, Columbia were reporting record application volumes, likely to see very different numbers in this coming admission cycle. So the perverse flip side of this, is it actually a once in a generation opportunity if the schools will see lower volumes, even with the idea of 80% being admissible, that in a smaller pool, for some candidates, this might be their best chance of securing a place at a top school?
Especially if you can assure a school that you will come.
Mm,
What a school doesn't want to do, and this is true of everyone, right? I mean, when you're invited and then turned down, um, it doesn't hurt, it doesn't help your yield numbers. You've wasted time on an applicant in terms of the investment you've already made, and schools don't want that to happen. So if
mm,
you're an international candidate in this environment, I would say you want to make clear that it's been your lifetime dream to come to the US for a degree. Um, and and that no matter what government policy is at the time of your enrollment, you intend to be there. Um, and I think that will go a long way
mm,
to enhancing your odds of acceptance when
mm.
there will be fewer international applicants.
Yeah. Now, we touched on earlier the importance of funding, of course, in a business school model, and even Harvard Business School with an endowment that is bigger than the GDP of many Latin American countries, had a lot of it locked up and faced severe cuts. They're certainly trimming all of their budgets right now at HBS. Back to the optics again of when an administration picks a fight with any institution or across higher education. What do you think are the ramifications of everything that's been happening on the funding level?
Well, what's happening is most schools are freezing their budgets or they're cutting their budgets. There are some schools that are even rethinking the number of tenure track faculty that they should have. So rebalancing in favor of adjuncts and clinical professors who are paid far less and who, and school doesn't have to make a long-term investment
Mm,
in an adjunct or a clinical professor. But if you're a tenure track faculty member, you do make a long-term investment. Essentially, it's lifetime employment. So there'll be rebalancing there. And I think in terms of cutbacks, I mean, in the early days, you'll cut back things that are easy to cut back. You might cut back on some marketing, branding, things like that, the staff, the support staff. And then depending on how severe the funding crisis becomes, you start cutting into programs and faculty.
Mm,
And many of the schools that international applicants are wanting to go to for a business degree are the schools that are well endowed, resource rich, and pretty much protected by their funders in a way that, even with in a frozen budget situation or a cutback on a budget, I don't think that the educational experience is going to be compromised in any meaningful way. It's
mm,
it's the second or third tier schools that are going to be more affected than that.
mm,
So even a Harvard, which has been threatened with withholding all their federal funding, which is considerable. Most of that funding didn't go to the business school. It went to schools in science and medicine. Um, so the effect on the business school would be less to the extent that the university then doesn't come in and reach with their hand into the
mm,
pockets of a business school to offset the funding cutbacks by the federal government.
mm.
Um, if the university does that, then the business school is obviously going to be impacted.
Right.
But in general, I think, the funding for business programs is minimal by the federal government.
Mm,
So it's a greater impact on other colleges in the university systems, at a Columbia, at a Harvard, at a Brown, or at the UC system of schools,
yeah.
where these cutbacks have been threatened, including University of Virginia in my hometown of Charlottesville, where the Department of Justice got involved in several investigations of the university, including its graduate and undergraduate schools of business, over DEI issues and threatened funding cutbacks that led
Mm,
to the resignation of the president of the university.
mm. Well, let's go to the idea of what funding is often tied to. We talk about a global AI arms race, and so anything that's within those national priorities, but then things that this administration is really looking to cut down on. DEI, one great example, anything around ESG and sustainability. Now, I can remember working with the Forte Foundation in their infancy. They produced a report in the year 2000, the MBA Gateway to Opportunity. And at the time, perhaps there were somewhere between 25 and maybe 31% women in the MBA classroom. In the past 3, 4 years alone, Wharton has had over 50% women for 3 consecutive years. Kellogg, Oxford Side have all reached that milestone. But now Forte faces pressure, or certainly the schools, to continue membership. We've seen that with the PhD project and also with the consortium. What do you think that impact might be for the pipeline of diversity into business school?
Yeah, obviously it's going to discourage it. Look, what has been made clear by the Department of Justice is that any preferential treatment of any kind given to an international student, a female, or a minority is illegal, is a violation of the law. The Department of Justice interprets it as discriminatory practice. So to the extent that any admissions policies that favored internationals, women, or minorities is actually against the law in the United States today. At least that's the interpretation by this administration. And that goes to scholarship aid as well, right? Because if you can't give preferential treatment on admissions to those three classes of people, you can also not award scholarships to them on that basis. You can award scholarship on the basis of financial need,
Mm,
and that's totally legit, but not on the basis of the fact that you're female, Black, Hispanic, or even international. And as
mm,
we know, these tuition rates are extremely high. And, the cost of living in a country like India, for example, where people don't make all that much money, even successful professionals, scholarship aid is important.
Mm,
But if you can prove financial need and merit, I don't think that there should be a problem. But it is changing things in the way students are admitted. For example, I know that at many schools now, even though admissions is a holistic process at a business school, and there are numerous elements to that process that would allow an admissions officer to identify your race and your background. Um, Many admissions officers are now making applications as blind as they can to race and gender. So an application official will look at the paperwork and will not be able to tell right away whether the person is male or female,
mm,
will not be able to tell whether the person is a minority or not, and will not even be able to tell if the person's an international
mm,
applicant. So the crafting of a diverse class gets somewhat compromised. Now, sure, there's a way around that because if I read your essay and you tell me you grew up, in Ghana and you had parents who were street vendors and you barely made enough money for you to have books to read, I'm going to know your whole background. But
mm.
essentially, when that application comes in, you don't know anything because the information that had been previously known to you immediately has been essentially redacted. um, so that it does affect things, actually.
One thought that I've had, and as you know, I do a lot of consulting, so crisis management
Yes.
consulting with deans at the top business schools. And often I encourage them to think about where do you want to be 12 months from now, a fixed time frame in the future. Because current events over a weekend or this article that just popped up in the FT and knee-jerk reactions, there's a lot of noise around that. So getting to them to think about what we handle in the immediate short term, but with a plan for where we want to be 12 months from now. And I wonder, when I think about Forte, the consortium, one of the things that they've always been so successful in achieving is role modeling and entire generations of talented young women, minorities that are going to business school. And we're talking about institutions that teach agility, being nimble, looking for opportunity out of challenges. This is the very essence of what is being taught in an MBA classroom. And I wonder if the business schools faced with these legislative challenges, with such strong communities, can themselves be this extraordinary source of activism to then showcase and role model and ensure that that pipeline of talent in the coming years doesn't falter.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that the response has been one of fear. Um, so to the extent that you can have advocates for diversity, and you could be outspoken about, the advantages of it. I think most leaders have chosen to be quiet for fear of attracting attention and the literally the vengeance of this administration,
Mm,
the retaliation of it against their views. So what you have
mm,
is pretty much silence.
mm,
Um, which is sad, but it's true. I mean, Dean here even told me, people are afraid. Simple,
mm,
you know, people are actually afraid,
yeah.
which is really terrible. I mean, and that speaks to also the pressure on academic freedom, um, which is apparent everywhere. Now, in business, less of an issue, obviously, than
Mm,
it would be in many other programs on a college campus, but um, nonetheless, people are afraid to speak out.
yeah.
So you
Now
do,
that,
so and to your point, we didn't mention, but you may not know out there that, there are several business schools that have walked away from their partnerships with Forte,
mm,
which is meant to encourage um, female enrollment in business programs, which, historically has been low. And only more recently are we achieving gender parity at a few schools. But still, there's a disproportionate share of men in these programs. And after all, business has been uh, often associated with a male kind of culture. I think that's changed dramatically in the last quarter of a century in the US for sure and elsewhere. Um, but nonetheless, there was a need for Forte, and Forte's done a magnificent job. And now some schools have abandoned Forte because of this government policy. Uh,
Mm,
and the same is true of the consortium, which was formed to encourage minority enrollment in business programs and be very supportive of people who want to attend a
mm,
business program who come from a background of being either an African American, Hispanic, American Indian in particular. And several schools have walked away from the partnerships with the consortium,
mm.
which also grants scholarships to these students. And that's just really unfortunate. But the lawyers at universities have looked at these contracts and these partnerships and have concluded that they are in violation of the law as interpreted by this administration and felt that business schools were exposing themselves to liability that was unnecessary, which led
Mm.
to these partnership.
Now, I hear the tone of your voice. It's subdued and it recognizes all of those challenges both of us have witnessed in our careers and our passion for business education, the extraordinary agent for change that is business education and workplace environments that you've described, greater levels of gender parity. Business schools have been heavily contributing to that. This is my rallying call to them. And whether it's through Poets and Quants, my work through Blue Sky, everything that they can do to showcase talent and opportunity. There will be restrictions, but I do think that they are an extraordinary source of ideas and creativity. And so this will be a big call. Now, another challenge for all of us is the planet. And of course, curtailing ESG and sustainability related research. And then on the other side of the Atlantic, you have INSEAD that's embedding sustainability in every core course of the curriculum. Imperial has an MSc in climate management and finance. I don't think you'd get away with that in the US these days. From Barcelona to Porto, the European schools are really rising to this challenge. Do you think, again, that policies on one side of the ocean will create opportunities on the other side?
Totally. And European schools have been in the lead anyway on climate change, sustainability programs at business schools, way more than US schools have.
Mm,
But the extent that some schools have basically proclaimed a sustainability agenda, and a number of schools have, including Columbia Business School, in the last 5 to 10 years. I think that let's say their enthusiasm for these programs has been somewhat diminished by the change in public policy toward them. So, I mean, if you are really interested in an education and sustainability and how it relates to business or ESG issues, you probably better off going to a European school today than a US one.
mm, yeah. So as we think about, it's always risks and it's always opportunities. As we think about global talent and what they can bring to any country, to any organization, um, your message, you get to talk individually with so many candidates, sharing with you their business school hopes and dreams. What is your message to them?
I'm going to say look to the long term. If you wanted to make the very generous gift of investing in higher education, and your dream has been to come to the United States and take advantage of the world-class business education that occurs here, and you want a chance to experience American culture, uh, do it. It's a long-term bet. It's not a short-term bet. This is something that's going to last for your entire lifetime. And you are going to find a welcoming, embracing student body here wanting to accept you, faculty, staff. Um, it's not what you'll read in the headlines, but it's the truth.
Mm,
And if you're matriculating next year and then you're going to graduate in 2 years if you go to an MBA program, um, I'm not going to say that all of this will pass, but most of it will pass, and you'll be graduating into a very different environment than the current environment here. The other thing
mm,
is, and I'll say this as someone who's devoted my life to journalism and media, we tend to often exacerbate the negative. And while I don't want to diminish what's going on here, because what's going on here is a revolution, it's not an evolution. You're going to read the worst of it because that's what news is, okay? It's what's different. It's not what is. So, you got to discount to some degree some of the things that you might be reading, not because they're not true, but because they might be overemphasized or too much focus is being put on that and
mm,
not on some of the more positive things. So I think you think long term and know um, that you're still going to get a great education here. You're still going to have incredible opportunities here that you may not have anywhere else in the world, incidentally. Um, and the dark clouds pass and sunlight comes. And I think you should have an expectation that that will happen again. But
mm,
I fear that there are going to be many people who this will have a lingering impact on, and they will avoid the US because there are great world-class business institutions in Europe and Asia and Australia, Canada, that will be beneficiaries of what's going on here.
yeah. Now, $100,000 visa that may or may not endure, as you say, take the long view. It certainly served as a wake-up call. The talent flows that are powered by education, business education in particular, they're fragile, and that every policy, intentionally or not, carries that ripple effect through classrooms and campuses and careers around the world. I would like to end on the idea it's not just about constraint, it's also one of reinvention. Because business schools show time and again their ability to reinvent themselves. They reframed through STEM, hybrid learning through the pandemic, the global alliances that they've had. So, of course, for them to look at how they turn this uncertainty into strategy, that's a strategy 101 class at business school. I think that the most successful business schools of the next decade, they're not just going to react to this policy, but they're going to anticipate it, they're going to shape it, and they're going to teach their students to do the same. And of course, all of this story our viewers can follow on the pages of Poets and Quants. It's the most comprehensive coverage of everything that's happening in business education. That's testament to you, John, and your incredible team with Jeff, with Mark, and everybody else, Kirsty, writing these stories. Thanks for taking the time. As a team, we felt this was a really important session to have and to be able to share. Perhaps just a final word from you.
I'll just emphasize what I said. Think long term. Know that you're welcome here. Know that there's great opportunity still in America. And know this too. When you sit back and you think about what is often called American exceptionalism, what makes America special? And I can tell you, there's no secret ingredient. What has happened here in terms of the opportunity that exists is a function of the fact that we've been able to steal the world's best and brightest decade after decade after decade. Go to Silicon Valley, and more than half the companies have been founded by immigrants. Immigration is the source of our great strength. It's the source of our exceptionalism. Uh, to cut it off, to discourage it. And I'm talking about legal immigration of skilled people. I'm not talking about illegals crossing a porous border, which most Americans would be against, of course. I'm talking about really skilled immigrants coming here to contribute. and incidentally, doing work that many Americans either can't do or won't do. That has been the secret to America's success.
Mm.
And that's not going to go away because if it does go away, America will never be exceptional again.
Well, we're going to be back in what, another 15 minutes for another section that looks at the MBA advantage and where all of the skills, the networks of a business school can take you in the next steps of your career. So do stay, enjoy the lobby at Centre Court. Lots of people that are there networking with each other, sharing their questions and their insights. John, thanks for sharing this session with me.
And Matt, thank you for your excellent questions and for your insights.